Thank you so much, Babusi, for such an incredible talk. As I welcome up on the stage my next guests, Jesse Weinberg from FNB, as well as Shonisani Lutole from Lean Business Platform. I just want to remind you that I am the landlord of today's conference, and rent is due. If you are not tweeting using the hashtag #OwnYourForce, I will evict you. I will find you wherever you are. Where are my guests? Jess, oh, there, hi. Welcome. Great. Can we just give them a round of applause as they come up? Thank you so much. Keeping in theme, sorry, I am a bit short. There we go. Keeping in theme with this segment of changing currencies, we're now going to get a corporate perspective on this. Welcome, gentlemen. Right. Let me give you a mic over here. Right. If we could just perhaps start with some introductions, who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my name's Jesse Weinberg. I work for First National Bank. I'm the head of the SME customer segment. So that's businesses that turn up to 60 million rand per year.
Hello, my name is Shonisani. I run a startup called Lean Business Platform. So we've created a platform that helps entrepreneurs with creating strategies, project management, and forecasting. We're in 5 countries and present in 28 other countries. And the name is about to change to Entrepreneur D. So we've got a new corporate changeover that's coming through.
Great. Gentlemen, when you received the theme of what you're going to speak about, what was the first thing that came to mind, Jesse?
The first thing that came to mind is I think he would know better what came to mind. So.
Pressure is on you, Nisani.
So, what came up into mind is also utilizing tools which people can use, entrepreneurs can use, especially in the cultural space, to actually also for me, it was also putting like business elements within what they're doing so they can seek themselves as businesses and they can bring in money in terms of what they're doing. So that's what I thought about, and giving them advice and using those tools and data to actually make their work reach far more people and engage and also make money from it.
Definitely. I think, Jesse, my question then to you would be, how is FNB helping the creative industry? What tools, what assistance is available to entrepreneurs that are in the creative space and are dabbling in technology?
So I think maybe also just to add on to your previous question, I think one of the things that also came to my mind is, in a lot of conversations we having these days is really around what is value, I guess, to begin with. So when we're talking about currencies, when we're talking about value, I think never before has the world been so in a state of flux in terms of, who's actually adding value to a person's life, what currency actually is going to keep value, elements of Bitcoin, elements of exchange rates, element of sort of how much is somebody's work worth. And I think what we're also doing at FNB is we are fixated at the moment on entrepreneurs in general, I guess. We think that they absolutely hold a lot of the answers to a lot of the problems that the world is experiencing. But I think what's more important is that when we've reflected on entrepreneurship, the actual essence of entrepreneurship is actually creative. People don't realize all the time that entrepreneurs are some of the most artistic people in the world because they're able to think outside of the box and they're actually able to find solutions to problems. When we did a lot of delving into this, it's actually very clear that if we're going to support entrepreneurships, we're going to support creative entrepreneurs, I guess, and it's probably a topic that's going to come up quite a lot, is what is a bank's role in terms of supporting creative people that are far cleverer than us in terms of spotting opportunities and in terms of solving problems. And what we realized, though, is that when it comes to creative businesses and when it comes to creative solution solving, the sexy stuff is absolutely about the problem solving, and it's about finding the right designs and around the right solutions. And it's not really around the accounting, and it's not really around the SIPSI, and it's not really around your banking. That's really not the stuff that people get excited about unless you work for a bank, and even sometimes we don't get too excited about it. But so where we've realized our place is really to support a lot of creative entrepreneurs is how can we take a bit of the headache out from the administration of a business. When we say administration as well, it's also about the education of how to actually run a business. So we've done a lot of work now, and you'll see a lot of stuff that's going to hit the market in the next 2 months of how can we get better at providing businesses with angst removal, with making their lives easier when it comes to helping them understand business education, understanding how accounting works. So I think, yeah, long story short, really what we recognize is we need to empower creative businesses and we need to empower entrepreneurs, because that's actually where the solution problem, the problem solving is actually going to come from.
Would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, like I agree in terms with a lot what he's saying, and also like there's nothing as natural, especially being a creative. You're a natural entrepreneur. It's just we need to go past also that element of just looking at ourselves in terms of creatives, and also look at our ways in terms of creating and looking at ourselves in terms of putting structure in terms of what we're doing, because we end up finding, especially in the cultural space, and that you end up finding a lot of us, because I've experienced it also, it's either I'm just a creative in terms of that, or I don't want to make money in terms of that, but you still need to live in terms of what you're doing in terms of that. So in terms of us, what we have done also in terms from lean business, so we have run, so we working with organizations such as Innovation Norway, where people came out into us because we come from a creative space in that, and also find ways in terms of helping these entrepreneurs in terms of getting them to start running as businesses also, because it becomes much more better also in terms of the fiscus for the country, but also for the entrepreneurs themselves. And that there's some research which I'll show, which we've done with over 2,000 entrepreneurs, that with 13,000, but 2,000 in terms of South Africa that we've engaged with, both from tech and also from the creative side of things. So I'll show you in terms of explaining it much more.
Please go ahead and show us right now.
So Jess is going to present first because he might have to leave before this. So I'll show you after that.
Oh, my. Okay.
Can you see it? Can somebody help me? Oh, yeah. So this is a tool that we have created, right? So what it does is that it's also got like a reverse classroom element to it. So, and first of all, the one thing I'm going to mention also, the tool that we created for entrepreneurs and engaging with it, it's free for entrepreneurs. So don't worry, you don't have to pay a cent for it, which is pretty cool. So it takes you all through the purpose in terms of what's this? Purpose. What's your purpose in terms of being an entrepreneur, in terms of that? So the information that you're also adding in terms of the system and all that, it's not based, you don't have to be writing it in terms from MBA type of element and all that stuff. You write it in terms of what you're putting also in terms of the information that you're putting into the space itself. So it's got a reverse classroom type of thing, so you're able to put in terms of what motivates you in terms of that. This is some of the questions. Oh, you can see? Oh, sorry. Can you see? Okay, cool. So it goes into the whole entire thing in terms of what motivates, in terms of that you end up plugging in and putting information in terms of the system itself. Also, it also covers in point in terms of like resources and that. So what we have done is that we've taken materials which is out there, which exists, where it covers from the lean startup to the causing the chasm, all that material that exists, and we also created this platform. So by creating also this platform, it even goes into the point in terms of like your business idea. So from a creative side of things, instead of, you can look in terms of whatever creative process I'm creating in terms of a play, if I'm using in terms of this and that, you can test it in terms within the market that allows you in terms of if this is this relevant in terms of what I'm trying to do and what I'm a position in terms of what I'm creating. Because most of the time we come up with a product, and when you come up with a product, you find there's not enough people in the market because you haven't really looked at your point, how you're looking at stuff. And then there's the business model, it looks at it, but also breaks it down in terms of, so it also breaks down your different ideas that you have, and you look at those ones you're engaging with directly and that. Because most of the time we go through that whole entire thing that we've got 1,000 of ideas that we're going through and that. And then objectives and that, but just to go to the research based on some of the people that we've engaged with, right? Let me open this one. Presentation. Okay. So this is the analytics and the insights that we got from the data of the people who keep on engaging in terms of the platform itself. So the analytics, it's broken down in terms of this. So there's the get. Can you see the get there? In terms of percentage of people. So get is to get an external intrinsic reward in the form of money or recognition above what is a normal salary level. So from the group that we've worked with, the 13,000, 15% were those people described get. And also to give is to give something to society rooted in idealism or values. From that one, that's around, okay, the first one is 15,000, the second one is 26,000 in that. And to make is to experience the fulfillment of making a product, service, organization, and that is 34% of the demographic that we worked with. And to live is to live a good life, people who want to live a good life. And that. So this is the information people are entering, and that's 28% of it. But as the data goes, you end up learning more in terms of what's interesting, because a lot of people end up thinking the motivation when it comes to entrepreneurship is just to make money and all that. But from our demographic and the people we worked with, it's showing something different in that. And effectual and casual, this one is like the key market. Business idea, who will be your first customers is 26%. But a lot of them also approach it in terms from core competence. I've got the competence of the skill in terms of engaging and doing this. So from the demographic, 74% of people look at that. And then this is what comes interesting, what motivates them. And this it breaks it down into from the cultural industry, which is arts, and also from tech, and also from demographic or some of the people who are not in those levels in terms we engage with in terms of South Africa. You find that, let's say from the arts itself, the people who want to get in terms of that is 3%. The people who want to give back is 14%. And the people who want to make is 27%. And the people who want to live in terms of that space, you find that it's 56%. So it also shows in terms of organization are also working and engaging with cultural entrepreneurs, and that they need to morph and change. They change the way they work in terms of helping in terms of cultural entrepreneurs, how we live. So we don't live in a space where we're creating us from moving it from hand to mouth and that. And then from a tech element to get, people want to get success, it's 29%. And the other one is to give, 19%. And people who are working it in terms of just to make stuff is 14%. And in tech is 12%. And then from Young SA, it was that. People want to get is 23%, but people want to give back. A lot of people want to give back in terms of society, in terms of that. Also covers it in terms of 33%. And those who want to make, it's 37%. And the young who just want to live is 7%. So in terms of some of the conversation that people have been having, especially covering some of the essence of what we, in that space, it's not based in terms of data and all that. So it's using data and elements to make and put in efficient stuff in terms of we working on that. So that's some of the research we have done. Okay. So that's. Thank you.
Jesse, perhaps you could come up and give us a bit of a response to some of the figures that Shonisani has shared with us.
Right, okay. So look, I mean, I think it's spot on. I think it's very interesting in terms of the motivational stats. I think what we're also finding in our research, so we've just completed a few big research studies now, and some of the results are going to also be released in November. But What's interesting is that what we found is when we're looking and we do a lot of global comparisons, the motivation forces and the motivating forces for an entrepreneur in South Africa is actually very different to many other countries. I mean, naturally, you'd imagine why. So in terms of, I guess, what's nice about this, we've split it out according to arts and techs and Young SA. I think first and foremost in South Africa, we've got an absolute need of necessity of people that are either unemployed. There's a massive level of high unemployment in this country. And that starts really putting things at a subsistence level. So the reality is that we've got a huge element of entrepreneurship where people are going into entrepreneurship, not even often knowing what the concept of entrepreneurship is, but they actually have to do it just purely from a necessity point of view. And it's with the headspace of just getting money to be self-employed, essentially. So what's interesting is, you know, with these, the statistics and the motivational factors, I guess it's a lot under the live component. Maybe said from a different direction, I think what we've also realized, there's a big job on everybody's hands in private sector, SA, and the government as well, is to really start getting our heads around the concept of, do we have entrepreneurs which are just doing it out of absolute necessity, and they just literally, as soon as they can make any money for themselves, that's good enough, versus actually taking entrepreneurship to a scaling level. And the result of that is not just about making enough money to feed myself and my family, but actually starting to scale a business that I can actually start creating employment and creating jobs. And I think that's also, you know, stuff that's correlating with this is, how do you start getting the headspace right from an entrepreneurship point of view? How do you explain to a nation, for example, and there's no real solid answers to this, but these are just some of the most recent thoughts of it. How do we start defining, you know, where we can harness people that are, and start picking them out of the crowd, where they're not just doing it because they've got absolutely no choice and they have to, you know, find a way to make money because they're not employed or they've lost their job. But then how do we start actually finding the people that maybe are employed and that don't necessarily have issues with, obviously, income? They may or may not, but how do we then start getting and fostering a nation of entrepreneurship where we want to start creating jobs and actually having these businesses scale? I guess maybe just to, you know, to put it in more simple terms, if we have a whole lot of entrepreneurs which are just going to stop at the point at which they're happy with the amount of money they've got for themselves, that's literally going to create, let's say, jobs of maybe 1 or 2, you know, versus how do we then get people to get into the headspace of that, don't stop when you think you've just got enough money for yourself. Really start focusing on a business that's obviously going to scale and start creating jobs. So I guess that's what's, the insights are really interesting, because I think it's these combinations which are coming through, and I think something that we definitely need much more emphasis on is to not just have this rhetoric of entrepreneurship is going to create jobs and it's going to save the country, it's going to save the economy. It's getting down to exactly these detailed factors and these motivational factors to say, how can we start creating more of a culture of that you want to create a business that scales to create jobs? You know, that's what's going to save the country, that's going to sort of save the economy, as opposed to just, you know, finding a way to make 5 Rand into 10 Rand, and when I get my 10 Rand, then I'm good, so I'm sort of going to stop there. So I think that's, yeah, it's something we're reflecting a lot on at the moment, but I hope that makes sense. Cool.
I'd like you guys to imagine this as your living room, right? And we are all your guests. Perhaps if you can go into dialogue about, you know, how the different currencies in the context of business, in the context of F&B, and in the context of a lean platform, the lean business platform. If you could chat to that a bit more. Remember, you're in your living room.
It's a very big living room with lots of people. So I think that maybe going back to what I was saying, maybe going back a bit earlier to what I was saying around value. I genuinely think that, and I've done a lot of reading as well in terms of even just the history of our country and in terms of where we've come from and also what kind of made South Africa in the beginning and what was value. And, you know, at one point South Africa in the global terms was regarded as a country which, you know, there wasn't much here. there was literally, it was a refueling station as sort of a shipping route, which was this small town called Cape Town, and obviously where there was all the, the native indigenous tribes that came from South Africa originally. And all of a sudden there was this discovery of this diamond field in Kimberley, and suddenly South Africa just became this, place where the whole world now realized there was so much wealth under the ground, and it suddenly became a hot topic. And then the discovery of gold around the corner here in the Witwatersrand in terms of, more value. But I think, what I'm getting at is that it's really created a lot of questions and a lot of interest as to say, with the likes of Bitcoin coming up from a currency point of view, with the likes of the Rand taking strain against other currencies, with Facebook launching their new, Lira currency, which is set to disrupt a whole lot of the world stuff. I think from our point of view, it's really around what is going to be the currency of the future, what's going to be the value of the future, that's going to be the most important resource for a business and for a nation. Without doubt, there's a lot of arrows pointing to the value of data, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard, in terms of that, data holds all this, it's the new digital gold, and it's the new, the next currency of choice. But I also think that just like with Bitcoin, things flare up and then they come back a bit. And I also just think that it's really about saying, all right, if the current trajectory happens with data, if every single big company out there gets their head around data, and everything is data-driven, to every one of us are data-driven, then essentially that plays into the hands of a lot of the machines which are going to handle all the data. And I think, personally, my reflections on this is that if that happens where suddenly data is so ubiquitous and it's so widespread and everything's so automated, and all the tasks that, that you've seen over here even can be automated, and all the machines and all of that, then what's going to then be value, and what's going to be then a valid currency going forward? And I genuinely think, and I'm not just saying this because this is a creative gathering, but I think it's genuinely creativity. I think that more and more, sort of as humans, we're going to need to really step up and say that our currency as humans is actually around how we're able to think and do what machines can't do. And that's really about highly complex problem solving, about looking at the world's problems. It's about applying creative thought to actually find solutions using the machines and using the data and all of that. But I think for me, it's going to be one of the most valuable currencies in the world are human beings that have got a creative edge that can actually solve for complex problems which a computer actually won't be able to get their head around. It's almost turned it into a human. But getting heads around solving these problems. So, I think maybe just in summary, I think my reflections are really that creativity is going to be probably the most important currency in the world, because it's something that really sets us apart as human beings.
I think from my side, what is also being showed, especially having the internet in terms of that, is that a lot of business models have changed. So most of the times we end up having this engagement and we're speaking about data and that, but a lot of creative people don't look at it in terms of them, in terms of their data, in terms of what they do, what can reflect in terms of engaging and working with different people. Because what the internet has also done is that it has also created, has also made this world a much smaller spaces in terms of that. So by looking in terms of you creating also some form of a fan base by using tools which are there, but going deep into that data and looking what does it mean in terms of me engaging, in terms of creating the art which I'm creating when I'm putting it out there in terms of that. So the importance, especially around I've done work with digital distributors like Funufa, which was acquired by Orchard and that, which is part of Sony, where you're finding artists also not just going out there in terms of willy-nilly. The whole music business model is gone. Now you can come to a point of you customer segmenting in terms of the people that you're engaging with. And also you end up finding like the same people who love your work in terms of this particular world. There's certain communities out there which also love your work itself. So by reflecting it, it also gives you the opportunity in terms of connecting with more people, making more money, and also growth and sustainability in terms of what you're engaging in terms of that. You end up finding like a lot of the things I end up looking in terms of, you find a lot of the creative, let's say in the music industry in terms of South Africa and that, There's some people who get that data, but no one is also asking themselves questions in terms of like, what does it mean? What does it mean? So they don't even know in terms of reflecting in terms of what this data mean in terms from the potential which I possess as a person in terms of that. So having stuff in terms of having stuff and learning more in terms of the internet, you just have to press play in terms of the video on that. And you learn in terms of how to reflect it. I had a good friend of mine, the way he used to hire like people to work with as software engineers, his thing was if they know how to search on Google. Meaning that if he's not there, the person is solution driven and they can search for themselves by finding these solutions, which everyone's got it in terms of their pockets now. This is the most important thing that we have in terms of in our hand in terms of technology that we have and can also help us in terms of reaching more people and engaging with more people and making money at the same time. So we don't have to be creatives. We need to make some form of money in terms of to live in that.
Yeah. I think when we think of creativity, for some reason we think that creativity is only in Johannesburg or in Pretoria and in all these major cities. How do we then reach our creative entrepreneurs in the rural areas? The people that are on the ground. How are your businesses equipping and preparing these entrepreneurs for the different currencies that are coming?
So, like I mentioned, we're quite excited we're going to be launching some really cool stuff actually in the next coming months. We're going to be harnessing technology for sure, because that is the one real upside of it is about scale and it's about reach. And we're going to try as best as we can to help with the dialogue and to help with spreading the word of what entrepreneurship means, but specifically, down to the element of entrepreneurship as solving problems and obviously as a way of creating a business and creating employment. And so we're quite excited is that we absolutely have focused our efforts on making sure that using our app, for example, and using the fact that we've got access to connectivity and we've got access to a network to distribute, that we are going to really try our best to start getting a dialogue out there and to start reaching rural areas as well, to start bringing down into more sort of realistic terms what entrepreneurship is, and that it's not just this Santon domain or big city concept. It really is accessible to anybody that just starts to think in a problem-solving way and how they can actually start turning 1 rand into 2 rand.
I always find that question also very interesting because sometimes people always try to have played around. There's someone who, especially when you look in terms of role, which is something very different in terms of what it is. But also because there's a project we end up working with ACB, and one of the things also, you also have this whole bias, you end up thinking all the money in terms is in Joburg in terms of that. And through those projects, you end up finding that a lot of the people who are making a lot of the money, some of them are actually coming from those spaces in terms of that. And we also at the level hand in terms, they are putting their work up there. And if you just look in terms of a lot of the people who are doing their creative stuff in terms with Joburg or whatever, a lot of us will come from rural areas, will come from those spaces. So if that means also shows that it's not only based in terms of being in the main city in terms of that, by having that tool and that it shows that creativity is everywhere and people are using it. Because one of the stuff which I always have problems, like people, where you're speaking with people who run or administrate like certain things that have to engage in that, they make their own decisions saying that people in those areas are not ready. And so what do you mean? Everyone is on Facebook in that space. They're using different ways in terms of connecting in terms of that. So you coming with your own assumptions because you're basic and you're saying people can't engage and use this thing. And it's false. In terms from a lean business, I got a call from someone from Venda in Jerere. It's like, I want to use this. How do I engage with it in terms of that? So you're showing that people are using this whole thing.
I think that's incredible. Help us understand, what are some of your personal or even business, why do you support creative entrepreneurs? What are your convictions, whether personally or business-wise, for supporting the creative industry?
Yeah, look, I think we covered a lot of it in what we were previously saying, but I think more than ever, I mean, a lot of the world's problems have been solved with creative thinking. I think that creative industries and creative businesses are often the bridge between boring bankers and commerce and actually reaching people's hearts and minds. And I think from that point of view, it's always, for me, a lot of the time been the adapter to say, we might know what we want to do and say on PowerPoints and on spreadsheets. And I'm just talking from my experience. But then when it comes to bringing the human element, to bring the market element and saying, this is actually how people on the ground are living or doing things or, or responding or not responding, I think that is just such an underrated element. And I think, I for sure recognize that that's, we got to do much more of sort of bringing that out, I guess, and it kind of positioning creative businesses more as more than ever being the gap between sort of the old world and even the current and the new world.
I think for me personally, this also became, because I'm a creative, so for me it was that point I came from the space. To me, at one point, it came to a point where I felt like I reached the ceiling in terms from the applications, in terms of applying to certain people, writing in terms of engaging in a different way. So I wanted to use another different form of creativity, which is in technology in terms of that. Because technology, people always try to separate the two. Like it's not one thing. It's creative in terms of creating these portals and that. So I crossed into another level and engaged and worked with different people so I can do something different, because I know the problem of applying, and when you're applying, you don't even put your salaries within that whole entire thing. Your money is taken up by the whole entire thing. I know the whole entire thing of being dependent on one organizations in terms of putting what you're doing. And then when that organization disappears, a lot of the people end up leaving that space and end up going into different jobs, and they don't continue in terms of that creativity. And also, like when we started, it also comes, a lot of my partners I work with come from the creative industry. It's like, what do we use in terms of technology to help the space that we came through? And also in terms from a creative point, everybody use creatives in terms of establishing what they're doing. So in terms of Instagram, it wouldn't be themselves, and that even people who start buildings, whatever, they want to bring in the creative people, so it also creates cultural, currency in terms of what they're doing. So we are the most important people in terms from the creative side of things. But by matching it and in terms of what certain lessons, and also matching it in terms of business acumen in terms of what you're doing, you can bring something, create something which lasts more than 5 or 10 years.
I'd like to open up the floor now to some Q&A. Roaming mic. Where's our roaming mic? There we go. Right over here, please.
Hi, how you guys doing? Good. I see the graph with I see motivation, right? But I don't see it including failure as well, because I feel like failure is part of a motivational thing as well. Is there a reason why you don't include it?
In terms of that, there's a different element of ours in terms of, let me just show you in terms of the different.
Cool.
Sorry. Sorry, the statistics. So in terms of those engagements, in terms of how many companies are failing and that, in terms of this, oh, Sherbet, sorry. I need to close this. And show. So in what we created, so in terms of failures and how many businesses are succeeding in terms of that, from ours you can predetermine in terms of the dashboard that we have created. Can you see? So on the left, it'll be also in terms of the numbers, in terms of the different entrepreneurs who are engaging with it and that. So when things are not performing, because this system itself feeds a lot of data back to the people who are engaging it. So you end up seeing it in terms of what it is and that. So it's more details when it comes to it. Because the one important thing about it is like, a lot of the people who end up running programs with entrepreneurship and that, they don't like capturing that, but capturing that data also helps in terms of course correcting in terms of what you're engaging, what you're doing. So we do capture those type of things. We just customize it within the system itself.
Oh, we have a question right there at the back.
Hi. Through the course of this conference, I started to think to myself, do you think that we need to start to redefine the creative industries? Because from what I'm hearing, you've got creative thinkers who occupy every sector and are part of all processes in all sectors. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on, you know, maybe we're ready to redefine, or is it specific to South Africa, this kind of very vibrant, creative industries that doesn't fit into maybe some of the older models?
I think, yeah, I mean, I'll just also maybe give you my opinion on it. I think, you know, for those of you that are familiar with design thinking as a discipline, you know, Tim Brown and IDEO, and I think that was a huge step forward where they realized that normal commerce needs to rethink, you know, bringing in a whole different way of creative solutions and processes. And I don't know about redefining, but I don't know about redefining the creative industry. I actually think it's more on the commerce side that we need to redefine commerce. And I think that's already happening a lot. I think that the world's really realizing when it comes to agile ways of working, agile ways of development, do you need to come into work in suit and tie, you know, pizza teams, development teams, hierarchies, all of that sort of stuff. That if anything, I think there's a great, call it a commercial revolution that's happening where I think we need to learn always much more from the creative industries and the creative processes, because that's actually more of a natural human problem-solving process. So I think, yeah, if anything, it should probably be more pressure on, and I think it's already happening, to be honest, but I think more pressure on big businesses and businesses. And I mean, applications that you're seeing here now are exactly to that point. We're sort of starting to harness a logical, well, not logical, let's call it a creative thinking flow, which maybe normal business needs to be redefined to accept. Yeah.
I'm just going to add in terms of like most of the stuff I was going to say, you was going to say, but it's happening also in terms of internationally where people, that's why you're finding governments or even arts institutions, like how do we help in terms of creating people to refocus. Like they're not saying that stop, get away from your creative process. Like no, how do you use that and also empower and also bring money from it, and also especially like one of the things that we're engaging with, we're working up in London. So we're doing a bit of work in terms of with University College of London. So we're also finding some forms in terms from working from the creative side of things, and also from another thing will be important in terms of like researchers which are come through from creatives, and that how do we use that approaches and bring them a business element to them so they can have a more strategic and a more stringent way in terms of approaching what they're doing. That also shows them this is what I can work towards in terms of currencies and making money basically.
Sorry, do we have any more questions for Jesse? Because he has to leave now. Are there any specific questions for Jesse? No, okay. Jesse, thank you so much for coming into our living room. Quite a big living room. Shoni, Sanya, I'd like to invite you now on the stage just to walk us through your platform.
Yes. Okay, so...
And then we'll take questions as soon as he's done. Thank you.
So I'm going to show you how to work at it much more better than previously when it was pretty quick. Thank you. Cases. So the general information that you're seeing here, right? So this is the information that you'll be putting on as the creative who's creating this stuff. And then when it says team and position, it's you and the partners that are working within your own organization that you're putting it through, that you put in. Then I showed you this whole entire thing in terms of purpose. We are finished with the English translation in terms of the videos, which are going to be coming soon and that. So where you can basically rework yourself in terms of what it is. Like example, it'll be what motivates you. So you end up pressing on the card here, and you put in information like I love art, whatever, for example. And you can put in more information like I am incredible at it. Oh, must I make it bigger? Okay, sorry. Oosh. Can you see it? Okay, cool. Then you end up saving it. Then it takes you all through the different steps of what you're doing. So I'm just going to jump straight in terms of resources and that. So the resource space is also doing is like a DIPS test in terms of what you have. It's either you have a bank account, it's either you have a grant which is coming through from a certain organization, it's either you're using your own money that you may have in terms of your account. Let's say in terms of, if you're a musician in terms of that, you are putting money to go do recordings in terms of that. So you end up putting that in terms of an asset. And also you end up breaking it down in terms of the people that you work with who are in your team and that. And do you have, in terms of this can be IPs, in terms of which building machines and physical assets do you have, you can name that. I've got an office, or I've got I'm staying in terms of incubation. Do you have any existing products? Can be in terms of paintings, can be in terms of music, it can be in terms of games which I've created, it can be in terms of graphics, design, or stuff which are made which in terms of original and that. Because most of the time we end up, when we create that in terms of creatives, we never actually measure it and actually put it up. This is my IP, which I have. So you end up engaging and putting it on. And then after you have put in all this stuff, it also gets into a point, it's like, from the assets which I have, now what is my idea? So the idea is also broken down in terms of three questions, right? So what problems will you solve? It can be a problem in terms of making people entertained, problem in terms of the problem which is there, it can be in terms of people seeing great art in terms of that. So it must be personal with what you're delivering in terms of that. And what is my competence that will make you unique? So it can be in that point where we go back to that research, you end up finding a lot of the people have, I've got the skills in terms of this. So it's skill-based in terms of what I'm creating and that. And it goes with who's got this problem. So who's got this problem? It's also like your customer bases. Who are your customers that are going to engage and are going to buy what you're creating? So it can be in terms of people, it can be people like organizations in like the Goethe Institute, the British Council or whatever, or even to a point of pointing out to the individual people that you put in. And as soon as you do that, what this has allowed us also is that it allows you also to do research on your idea itself. So research helps in terms of doing like customer segments and also finding out who's doing what. Let me use an example. Add to interview. So based on the questions the answers that you've put in terms of from the business idea, so you end up going this, I'm going to be speaking to, let's say for example, I am in the process of creating ideas for institutions like the Goethe Institute and that. So you go, there's a particular idea which I'm working on. How am I going to shop it around? So you end up speaking to a particular person. Would you be interested in me working on this particular idea in terms of that? If they find it interesting in that, you're able to enter that question. So you're able to mark yourself between 1 and 7. So if many of your research says it's around 3.5 or 4.5, then you find like people find your idea quite relevant in that. Because mostly people, what they do is that they create product in cases like, let's say you create CDs or you create shoes or you create art without finding out how many people are actually interested in the work that you're creating. By doing this, it helps in terms of losing money before you end up losing, helps in terms of not losing money. Then it goes to the point which is quite interesting, which is also the business model. So the business model is basically in terms of how do I make this money? So what we did, some of this you're going to identify also with a way in terms of from a business model canvas in terms of what you put in terms of it. So with this one, it breaks down. So from the ideas that you've created, right, from the business idea goes to the business model, it allows you to separate the two different ideas. Because most of the time we engage and work in such a way that we say we've got too many ideas. No, with this, it says like, okay, based on these two different ideas that you have, let me separate them and let me look at them individually. And then as you look at it, so based on the ideas, the 5 ideas which I have, idea 3 is the one which can bring me some monetary, some money much more quickly. The other ones, you don't say that I'm killing them. You're saying I'm putting it on pause. And then I'll use it in terms when it comes to that space and that. You see, like there's the 2 ideas, electronics reseller, precious metals recycle, whatever. And then it goes to objectives. So objectives is like, what objectives are you sticking to for the next 12 months? So if you are successful at these 5 things, which we took it from the DuPont way of approaching, what are the skills and capacity objectives that you need? So it can be in terms of like, I need more salespeople, I need to engage, get more education in terms of myself and that. So I'm able to list it and putting it, and it also breaks it down in terms of what particular month you want to achieve this. And also if you are seeing the date, what it's doing. So without actually realizing also is that you are actually creating a forecast based on what you're doing as a creative and that, you know? Then it comes, what are your products and services development? What are you developing? If you develop in terms of software, in terms of that, when do you want to finish it? How many hours are you working on that? And how much are you investing that you are able to enter it within the system itself? And also saying, I have to work on this idea in terms of paintings and that. I've got an exhibition which is coming up. You're able to say, I need to achieve this by this particular month. So this thing ends up being a plan and helping you stick to what you're working and engaging with. So you're actually working within a plan. And what are the marketing and sales objectives? A lot of people say, I'm doing social media, but what does it mean? If I'm saying I'm doing 1,000, but what is social media marketing? Is it, because it's different, is it Instagram? Is that, so you break it down. You can say I have to do like maybe I want to reach to 2,000 people, or I want to do 100 posts. But what is 100 posts within those different platforms that you're doing? So you're able to divide that and actually approach it in a more systematic way and that. And money objectives will be in a point where you're saying, I'm going to apply for a grant from this institution or whatever, and I think I'm going to get this money within March and that. Let's say in December. So by doing that, it also helps you in terms of coming up with plans, actually. So your first meeting of engaging and contacting that person in that, you end up putting under that objectives. So you're creating this natural way of working. It says, I want to achieve this objective, but I have to have meetings with them and speak about the different people in terms of government, in terms of funding institution, in terms of whatever, basically. And then you put it like, this is the budget, this is what I think I'll achieve in terms of October. If it's 100,000, I'll put it there as in terms of 100,000, in terms of a grant or whatever. Or if you want to sell some equity in terms of what you are creating, equity will be like a percentage shares in terms of your company. If you want to bring in someone, you also can measure it. I'm going to sell this type of shares for this amount and that. So by putting all this other amount in that, and then there's this COGS, which is basically cost of sale on goods. So most of the time, when in terms of, it helps in terms of pricing what it is. So it can be in terms of I'm buying materials in terms of making a painting, and I need to calculate from what markup, what price am I going to put it. So maybe you say, okay, you got this thing for 70 Rand, and I want to sell it at 100 Rand. So you end up finding your cost of sales is 70 Rand, but you're going to make 30%. What you get, the 30% is going to be the full amount. So your profit is going to be 30% in that. Oh, time. Okay, sorry. So after this, what it does, right? Just one more thing. Not that whole entire thing when somebody says, give me your business plan, right? The system creates a business plan for you. And breaking down in terms of different positions, it creates in terms of the different revenue streams that you're going to come through. It goes even to the cost of goods in terms of what it is. And when someone says, what is your thing? And it's an ever-changing thing that you can change. So this thing is yours. And it's free for creatives. Yes, so
Unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A, but Shoni, you are still around for a bit, right? I think you can approach him out in the courtyard as we go out for tea. Please use this as an opportunity to pay your rent, right? Before you come back into our living room at 11:30. A reminder that the bathrooms are to my left, your right, as well as out in the courtyard, my right, your left. See you back at 11:30.